Welcome to the Skeptical Auditor podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Hernan Murdock. Today on the show, we are joined by Anthony Chan, an internal audit services manager at Vonia Global. In this episode, we talk about how auditors are adapting to our changing world and the importance of auditing financial and operational topics through IT, data, and visual analytics lenses. Anthony also explains what makes purple auditors so effective, and he shares a formula to better connect with our clients and convey our messages more effectively. All that and more, starting now. Anthony, it is so good to have you here on the podcast. Really look forward to our conversation. And one of the things that I like to do is just get a little bit of an insight into the individual. I'm a big believer in understanding the person before we get into all the technical details of what we do as internal auditors. So, where do you grow up and how did that influence who you have become?
Well, thank you for inviting me. Yes, my background, I'm originally from West Virginia, grew up there, came to Chicago for college, and then I've stayed in the Windy City. I guess I love the cold and the wind. But my background really started at 1994. I tinkered with my first computer, a Packard Bell. And so I got into just figuring out how does it work. And then my cousin at the time worked at Anderson Consulting. So I always had big plans of like, hey, I'll be a consultant for life. And fast forward to college to the 2000 opportunity came my way at the Big Four. And I really didn't notice that until I got in. And through my career there and my progression, I got to learn about the credits and debits. And I learned the financial side of things. So you take this IT engineering background person and you combine it with finance and accounting, that's who I am today.
Very interesting combination because definitely we've seen the accounting profession come a long way in terms of how it's relying on technology and leveraging the power of technology to, of course, the GL and all the different transactions. And organizations have grown so much that we're now talking about millions of transactions for some organizations a day. So definitely that knowledge about IT and systems definitely very helpful there. So as we're thinking about technology and technological development and improvement. So, what are some of the trends and the things that you see from your vantage point, having been in this field for so long and seeing some of the evolution from that Packard Bell days? As you were talking about, I was thinking about Radio Shack and TRS-80 and so on. That was my first exposure to computers as well. But as we see how far we have come, what are some of the predictions and dynamics that you see? What are the trends?
Things are constantly changing. You can't be stuck with the status quo. So the first trend I would definitely say is the environment of the business is changing. And so the need for internal auditors, external auditor is changing as well. So that trend will never stop. And I say that because I look at some of the things that my internal audit colleagues are doing. They're branching away from the pure financial audits to more operational, IT audit, integrated audits, and even some they're dabbling into quality. So you take the old siloed approach of, hey, I'm going to worry about my financial statements. Now, because an enterprise is worried more than just that, the auditors need to change and shift. So that's
interesting. As you're talking about the financial reviews and all of those things, I was an auditor when Sarbanes-Oxley came out, and I remember very well looking at some of those SOX-related controls. And as we're doing that review, I will take a look at the way they were doing the work, and I will identify a lot of inefficiencies. And quite often the conversation went along the lines of, well, that's not in scope. We don't go there right now. Maybe we'll come back later for that. But right now, it's just focusing on these things. So I understand how scope matters, but definitely to your point, very important to help the organization in those operational matters too. There's a lot of value there. So can you tell me a little bit more about that dynamic around quality? Because I'm very interested in that as well. Are you referring to things like Six Sigma and Lean? Is that what you have in mind?
Some of that, and also in the manufacturing process. So I had a colleague that's in the medical device area, and he was involved with the manufacturing of these devices, but testing it out from an IT lens. So let's say a pacemaker or a device. Well, since now you have IoT, Internet of Things, they're connected to the internet. So who's going to test to make sure that that connected pacemaker can't be hacked, doesn't have a vulnerability? So you take some of that IT knowledge with the quality and manufacturing practice, and you sort of combine them. Or if you can't put two people in a room, hopefully you have an auditor that knows both sets.
That is definitely getting your value, your money's worth, right? When you talk about the value you can bring to the conversation with the client. So, along those lines, then, one of the things that has been used as a term to describe individuals who can do some of what you just described, which is understand the systems and the technology and that side of things, in addition to having communication skills to be able to explain what the benefit is and how we can better serve the client. So, this idea of understanding context. All of these things are wrapped around the term of purple auditor. Would you consider yourself a purple auditor?
As purple as your sweatshirt. I love the term because
Okay.
that's how it describes me. In a way, you're sort of a little bit of jack of all trades. Because
Mhm.
it's very important, because as the industry and the companies changes, the auditors have to change. And some of it means being able to communicate more effectively and, more importantly, understand the business beside just the numbers, understanding how the procurement cycle works, how the manufacturing process, like I mentioned. And so the purple auditor is someone that has in-depth knowledge of the business with that soft skill, but also the objectivity and analytical skills that's important to do meaningful work, to bring the ahas either to a senior manager, to a colleague, because at the end of the day, we're trying to bring value to a company, regardless if it's from the plant side to the office.
Now, one of the things that I've been in the field for a long time, and one of the things that I've noticed is that we have migrated from the practice of the auditors just providing a list of issues to the client, right? Kind of old school auditing was just go through, see where they're not complying, whether it's internal, external, financial, otherwise. But you're not doing a good job. Here's a list of things where you're failing at, and please go and find a solution to these things. And now we're spending more time working in terms of helping them come up with better solutions, right? In terms of the recommendations, the corrective actions, benchmarking, all of these elements. So all of these things I will imagine is encapsulated in that understanding and how we're presenting ourselves to the client as a consultant, of course, right? Of sorts, where
Right.
we're basically saying, okay, here are some issues, but I have some suggestions for you. Let's talk about these things.
Yeah. Well, in the other half, you have to look at the other person's shoes, because sometimes, and I've seen it for my past, an auditor will run an analytics script, or they'll bring a third party, and the third party will bring in, like, yeah, these are the 16 that are non-compliant, and they'll package it in a report. They'll give it to their auditee, and guess what? The auditee sees it, and they're like, what the heck? Do you
What does this
know
mean?
what does it mean? Oh, and some of these things, they're not important. Did you do any due diligence? And some of my colleagues are just holding their breath and be like, oh, was I supposed to do that? Like, yeah.
That's what going the extra mile means. But it's also just very simple too. It could be just basic customer service in terms of helping the client understand what you're looking at. So this probably brings us to another interesting development, which is visual analytics, right? Is being able to use charts and graphs and other ways of conveying the message. So you're still showing numbers, but you're providing more context, and it's a more engaging way. So is that something that you also use in your work?
Yes, since the early 2000s, my first job was putting together pie charts of curriculum, looking at what law students did and did not take, and presenting it back to the teaching, the professors, the community, to be like, oh, what you thought everyone should be taking, they're not. So that insights used to be in pie charts. Now, because of things like Tableau, you're able to do more meaningful visualizations to look for things. And so, yeah, a lot of auditors, we tend to like Excel, and I've been trying to break the mold, or tell other auditors, just branch out. You use something like Tableau so that your audit reports can be more visually impactful. Because if you give somebody a bunch of writing and charts and graphs, you're going to bore them.
And that's the way the world is going. We are looking at our world become very visual. A lot of what's happening in social media, a lot of it is also driven in that direction too. So our world is driven by visualization, by visual representation of dynamics, and that definitely will help. In addition to the fact that a lot of our customers are definitely looking at those dashboards and so on. So I would like to continue exploring this topic further. So let's take a short break and we'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by ACI Learning. Are you looking for CPE credits, professional development, to continue your education, or a custom team training solution? Here at ACI Learning, we've been building high-quality training for over 40 years, meeting the needs of every learner. Our training solutions will keep you and your team engaged and motivated to learn, helping students stay sharp in their field and better serve the organization. Join thousands of global audit, risk, and compliance professionals. Visit acilearning.com to find out how we're disrupting the audit learning space.
Anthony, so a very important aspect of our job and our duty as an internal auditor is to present information to our main stakeholders, which will be senior management and the board. And as we try to present this information to them, they need it in a way that they can understand not only what the numbers are, but what the numbers mean. So how does that spirit of customer service and providing the information they need fit into this world of technology, since we don't want to be overwhelmed by technology without understanding the purpose of it and the use of it? So how do you see customer service fitting into this as we provide a service to our senior management and board members?
Good point. I think it starts with the very first job, either out of high school or out of during a college internship. My first job was selling shoes. And then when I went to college, I worked a part-time job in retail. And so I think having that experience, and hopefully people will sympathize with working in retail early on in their career, that really tees up your customer service skills, so that when you do have to present to the board, you're prepared and being, hey, this is the value that I need to convey, because the board and management, they want something. They want to make quick decisions. And so if you can respond to them, be empathetic, be humble, it's going to resonate very well, and it's going to carry your message through.
Yes, and part of that is the importance of communication. It's not just you sending that message out, right? Whatever you're trying to convey, but it's them understanding, appreciating, and valuing the message, because we expect them to take action as a result of that. So definitely very important to be able to push, to share that and help them appreciate and understand it in that regard. So as we're thinking in terms of, for example, Tableau and other tools that are available, Power BI and so many others that are in the market emerging pretty much almost every week. So what are some of the techniques that you use to help to accomplish just that, which is to convey that message and help them appreciate why something that you think is important should be seen as important to them too?
The very first thing is part of the Vanya global methodology is understanding what type of analytic and visualization is needed, because there's different aspects. And I'll start with, from one end of the spectrum, it's profiling. Profiling, looking for anomalies. Is that what you're trying to achieve? Because if your audience is doing this for the audit, then it makes sense. Now, if you are doing something that you need to validate the data or validate the process, maybe having a walkthrough, and hopefully the analytics will help drive the discussion during the walkthrough. There's that type of analytics. And then finally, you have reporting and presentation. And so I think that's the latter is going to be important for your boards and your management, is you package it up and convey the right message to your audience. So first, understanding what you're trying to achieve is probably the most important. And then the second is, taking the Tableau skills, Power BI. Power BI integrates nicely with the other Microsoft tools. So if you're already using SharePoint and Microsoft Flow, you can take that analytical technology acumen and apply it to the software suite so that then you can deliver what's needed. So again, understanding what you're trying to achieve, understanding the tools and technology that you have, hopefully that will drive you home to the analytics that you need to deliver on.
Yes, and as you're describing that process, I recall many instances where the auditors perhaps were not paying sufficient attention to this idea of be clear about what you're trying to convey before you start putting information into a tool and trying to then come up with some kind of a visual, right? A chart, a graph, some representation. What exactly you're trying to convey? The tool should work for you and not you for the tool. So in that case, I believe that in some cases we probably mix up the order of things and then miss the opportunity to really make an impactful presentation to our audience.
Yes, and also knowing the audience. There's one visualization that I'll sort of give you is in one of my clients is looking at purchase orders, POs. And one of the things that we can do is take in data and plot it against the items that is received against a purchase order, a PO. And to some auditors and some people, they might use bar charts to terms what purchase orders are completed. Or another analytic that I created was looking at if any time the purchase order date is after the goods received date. In the sequence of things, that shouldn't happen. You create your purchase order and your line items, and then you receive on it. Well, you can create an analytic where you look for, did any time a particular item, the PO date is after the goods receipt date? Because that shouldn't in theory happen. So if you know a little bit about the business, that business acumen, and you know the data points you need to look for, purchase orders and receipt date, you can use your analytic tool to point at it, maybe use Excel early on, and then use Tableau or any visualization tool to say, I'm going to now give you a scatter plot or some sort of visualization that says, hey, here are the 30 that shouldn't have happened, but oddly enough, they happened. And so do you give that to the auditee? Do you give that to the person at the manufacturing distribution plant? Figure out what the objective and who your audience is, and then you can package it up and deliver it.
You know, another interesting thing about what you just described, and I, by the way, thank you very much for that example because it helps to illustrate what we're talking about in a very practical application and something that happens in a lot of organizations. And I've done many reviews where that's exactly what happened. Now, another thing that came to mind, and that's why I want to come back to it, is that sometimes you talk to people and they say, well, this happens and this is a problem, and they describe it as a problem. And of course, you understand that certain things should not happen like you described, but can you quantify it? How can you take that message to senior management and the board by just saying, well, I spoke with Sally and this is what she said? Well, that's anecdotal information and that's hearsay. It's not very compelling argument. It should not go in a report like that anyway. So by doing what you just described, we can basically help to support even the lower level individuals in our organizations to convert that thing that they know intuitively from their work experience into numbers that will then support what they're experiencing. And then by presenting it appropriately and to the right audience, we can then close the loop on it and hopefully get the resources to help alleviate those problems. So it provides a very important mechanism to address operational problems at current organizations.
Yes, you can help Sally, you can help Bob, you can help their managers and their managers' managers. So it has a very cascading effect, a positive, potentially positive effect.
So when you're thinking about what auditors do and not do, so we spoke a little bit in terms of what the kinds of things that they should do and how they can leverage the message and the tool. What do you see that auditors are doing that they probably should do differently or not do in light of some of the practices that are not being very effective in their work?
I would definitely use a keyword that the Institute of Internal Audit has is professional skepticism. Is really don't take anything face surface. Being able to look at the information as presented and inquire, follow up, ask Bob, ask Sally, and then draw conclusions as appropriate. So I think that's the first mistake or an improvement opportunity for auditors and people is to really have that mindset. But also on the flip side, not challenge it where you think it is fraud. I'm a person that has been in forensics and investigation. I don't say it's fraud. It may smell, it may taste, it may look like fraud, but we as auditors, we're not in a position to say it's fraud. We can say, we're going to gather as much evidence as possible for someone that's appropriate enough to make that determination. So put your fraud, error mindset away and say, let me dig. So the most important thing is just dig and get sufficient supporting evidence. From there, I think everything else is gravy.
And I think that's a very important piece of advice for a lot of auditors who may want to jump, right? We're all thinking in terms of, can you find something significant that you can bring to management attention? And sometimes we may overstep in terms of concluding, and it may not be our purview to make that conclusion, right? We present the evidence. And once again, we go back to the power of the technology available to us now and the mass digitization of information that we now have. A lot of that information available is a matter of being able to gather it, analyze it, and then present it in a way that is going to demonstrate the results of our work. So this has been very, very helpful, Anthony, and I really appreciate you sharing all of these insights with us. Thank you for listening to the Skeptical Auditor podcast, and a big thank you to our guest, Anthony Chan. If you're looking for more ways to stay ahead of the curve and earn CPEs, check out Audit Pro TV On Demand, subscription learning for auditors by auditors. Visit acilearning.com/auditprotv.